How did he mediate with minimalism, with conceptual art and pop art? I think all the three things.
Like most of the abstract expressionists, he disliked them. I think, that was felt threatened at the studio school and came into a crit, and Christopher was last after like 25 artists. He was working all day, and he showed him his painting, and he said, why don't you show that to Jasper Johns? And it was his sort of put down of, well, that's conceptual painting. So I don't know, he may have said things that were more or less personally generous or ungenerous, but for that whole generation, there was with very few exceptions, there was a general resentment of how quickly and easily things came for other people, and maybe that tiny, degree of self-pity or darkness is maybe, in answer to Irving's question, something other people have written about who knew Gustin quite well, that would be the one thing that he saw in common with Nixon, but what he saw that he had that Nixon didn't have in the long summer he spent in 1968, Gustin sort of analyzing himself, and he came up with the same set of an iconography to represent his personal, like the smoking, the painting, the drinking, the eating, just like Nixon has all of this sort of iconography, or Kissinger has those black classes, and Spiro Agnew is the pyramid form. So what he says that Nixon lacked, though, was the ability to look at himself and understand himself.
Yeah.
So we should mention one thing I do think it's important reading. That all of his fellow abstract expressionists, with the possible exception of de Kooning, Gustin loved the Harriman cartoons. And when his work was shown in 1980, his colleagues picked up the pop dimension in Gustin's work, which was one of the reasons so many of them turned against him.
That's even in these drawings here of Nixon's face.
Yeah.
Definitely, there's the crazy cat influence. You can see it in some of the drawings with the two eyes and the nose.
That's part of the drawings that he was looking at the cartoons from the 1930s.
The bricks got flung from there and wound up in the late work all the time. I would take what you say, Katie, a little bit deeper. Morty Feldman didn't call Philip the arch crank for nothing. Philip didn't stop with Jasper Johns and so on. One night, Giacometti could be, Bill, come on, that's the kind of thing you may like. He was. This comes back to I didn't understand it then because I was too young and unformed. This comes back to a level of embrace that we're talking about with Nixon. When what you began with, he did absolutely want it all, which means that everything was on the table, everything was to be talked about, everything was to be scrutinized, and he did that relentlessly, constantly, but not just these artists out there, whether it was Johns, whom he attempted to bring, was on the cusp of bringing to BU just before he left. Johns had agreed, and the date didn't work out, so that this was not personal, although it may have sounded like that to people who didn't hear him often enough. This was a deep, abiding churn of what it meant for him to be an artist, and to be young, and to listen to that was absolutely formative, not just to me, but
wouldn't it be fair to say that to Katie? Wouldn't it be fair to readily suggest Cinderell's show here at the gallery? In the far back room, there were wall cover with drawings that was incredibly minimal. They are 1, 2, 3 lines, as though he stripped himself down to begin from the very beginning again, which for the life of me, if I remember that incredible article that was published in Art News, 1966. It's called Fake Hope and Impossibility. The first thing he talked about, to paint, is to start from the very beginning again, yet trying to avoid the familiar argument, what you have among yourself. The painting, the canvas you're working on, essentially modify the previous painting before it with an unending, baffling cycle, which seems never finished. Second, which is interesting, he talked about the painting is the court, where the artist is the prosecutor, the juror, the defendant, and the judge all in one. And why it's so interesting, I want to point this out because it seems maybe he didn't like minimalism, yet he kind of started doing
I
it.
mean, you can look at it, the late work of Barnett Newman, of Mark Rothko, and say, well, they were obviously looking at Donald Judd, they were looking, and yeah, well, maybe they were, and it's kind of so what, a little bit, you know, so, because a lot of the later ABX work looks graphic, quite graphic, but I think that's not such an interesting question. I think except it's kind of great if you're if you're an older artist and you're still like looking around and picking stuff up and not just locked in a box.
That's
But
what I meant. Like
that's
he's not
unusual.
very perceptive.
But I think for me, looking at that Gustin work, and I think we are in a privileged position because it's a later moment, and we're not, younger artists aren't caught up in that debate of abstraction versus figuration. It doesn't mean the same thing today as it did then when there were real camps and there were real political meanings but also commercial meanings to abstraction versus figuration. So now we can look at those Gustin drawings from the 60s and see what Irving was saying, that there's not such a huge difference, or at least there are points of connection between this figurative work around us and that work, that we can see that there is a return to zero, not in the sense of minimalism as an ism, as it might have been for Judd, but in the sense of materiality, and a return to finding the answers and the importance of what art is in materiality. So not abstraction, it's purity, which is a European definition of abstraction from the 20s and 30s, and that's what people reacted against.
Right.
But to see it as materiality, and I think you see the same things in these drawings, which are linear, but they're full of stuff. And what stuff is, they just show it in a figurative way, rather than the abstract way of just manifesting it. And that's the continuity.
There's a connection here between what Irving was saying earlier. Nixon said that remark about you won't have Dick Nixon to kick around in 1962 after he lost the gubernatorial election in California. He spent the next 4 years, 5 years, working his ass off to get all kinds of congressmen elected. He was not about to go away, but he certainly went underground. It was a period for him, as he was to say later, of clearing the decks, a phrase that Philip later used when he was painting, and with those drawings, which I do not think of as minimalist at all. They are just too absolutely sensual to belong in that ballpark. At least to my mind. But when he's doing those, remember that there's also the tug of war he spoke of. Those drawings start in Sarasota, Florida, but by the time he continues them, he's doing one of those on Tuesday, and on Wednesday he's got a jalopy riding across the paper. He's doing another on Thursday, and then he has one of those beautiful chairs that are in some of these drawings, those chairs from the 30s. At the same moment, Richard Nixon was absolutely, and a phrase everybody who writes about Gustin sooner or later loves, was reinventing himself. And both men came out of that like gangbusters. But one more thing to say. Often, Gustin and I would begin a night with talking about his recent work and going back and forth, and I'd ask him a question about the 50s, and he'd say, oh, that stuff that you like. You know, well, I did. And one of the things I began to realize was that, although he never said it directly, certainly to me, the late work was a I wouldn't say it was satirical, it was his commentary on what he'd done before. It was certainly that. It was not simply goodbye to abstract expressionism, I become a new man. I think he really felt, this is where I wound up because I absolutely belong here. And now I know what to do with it.
Thank you.
There's another aspect in Gustin's work which I think runs through his entire late career, and the attitude is anti-minimalist, which focuses on the object. Gustin is still very much an existentialist.
Yeah, no, I agree with it, but don't you think that when he did those singular line or two and accumulate slowly, and then he went on to do the alphabet painting, one object at a time, there is seemingly to be a repetition, to play with certain kind of serial idea, and I don't mean that as deviation against minimalism.
No, but he's breaking down the elements of painting,
Right.
which the minimalists stood opposed to.
Right. Okay. Now that we're on the trail of a formal issue, Bill, I want to talk to Lisa about.
Now that you're talking about formal issues, I want to ask, where did those orgy drawings come out of in terms of, was Nixon known for having orgies?
No.
They're pretty amazing. There's a bunch of orgies over there. I was like, whoa.
No, but Lisa...
I know they're all from California and that goes on there.
Really?
Yeah, apparently.
But Lisa...
It is mine.
Lisa, this has been... Nixon's been all over the paper. Knowing I was doing this, my antenna picked him up everywhere. Friend sends a bit of Zsa Zsa Gabor from a British newspaper. This did not appear in any American paper that I saw, where she claimed she'd had an affair with Nixon. And she said, darling, they don't call him Tricky Dick for nothing. If Zsa Zsa had a modicum I never saw those until this show. Where did they come from? It seems to me they came from Nixon's schlong nose, because he's got his nose up the ass of America in one of the ultimate brown-nosing move, but I don't know where.
But I mean, one of the things, I'm sort of partially being facetious about it, you know, but one of the things that I was convinced that I read somewhere, and a couple people here worked on a book with me last year, and I was banging the doors of whoever, I was probably trying to get to you, Musa, but now I can ask you. There was a quote that I was convinced I read somewhere, and then I couldn't find it, and I went through, and I had people combing through every book and the book of his writings, and it was really, it's something, I may have made it up, but I don't think so, and it had something to do with he understood himself to be a cinematographer. And
Yes.
at a certain
Absolutely.
point,
It's in his writing.
and I just couldn't find it anywhere. Nobody could find it anywhere.
Have you heard
That
of the book?
I did that, darling. But no, trust me, we had a team of people on this, and it was just like really, literally couldn't find the exact place where we found it. We couldn't find it to quote it.
Can I respond
Yes,
to
please.
But in terms of these things, and the orgy scene, I love the idea that like Gustin, he has his cast of characters, and then pulls back and is mise en scène was the idea, and then these mise en scène where. But go ahead.
So,
Now that I finally have you to ask, where did I find that?
I don't know about the quote, but in curating the show and looking closely at those drawings that are so shocking at first, one of the things you notice about the Nixon figure in both those drawings is he has the Orphan Annie eyes. He's sort of, wow, wide-eyed,
Yeah.
innocent eyes. I think what's going on there is he's observing what's going on. He's not a part of it.
He's so square. Looks like
Exactly. I mean, I think here he portrays himself at least.
I think being at an orgy and observing is. I've never done that, so I'm way squarer than Nixon. Even in Gustin's mind, it's like to be the observer in an orgy is already cool.
Right. I think you're taking it more literally.
I know what you
than
mean.
intended.
I'm just saying,
No,
it's,
but
he's
He's
not.
surprised to find himself
But
there.
I find, yeah, but I found,
Thank you.
the idea of the California, that it just the fluidity of Gustin's, the camera. Another thing that came, that someone who died recently is the person who invented the camera, the camera that you can just do a tracking, the free flowing.
The Steadicam?
Steadicam, yeah. The person who invented that passed away, and it was just, or it was like an anniversary of it, or something. It was like in the news, and there was a lot of information about like what different movies they couldn't have made and different scenes. And when I was looking at this, maybe that had been going on at that time, essentially how news affects even the times when you're looking at art, and how different times, you wake up in the morning, you read something, something's going on, as we were saying, if Hillary had been elected, we'd be talking about this slightly differently, or maybe not. Fortunately, we're mostly talking about it as great art.
To pick up on this, we were just mentioning that Pat doesn't appear. That women don't appear.
In one drawing.
In one drawing.
Yeah.
You know which one it is?
No, I missed it.
It's the drawing, they're the little couple getting married.
Oh, yeah.
Very tiny figures with a big curtain, right about 2/3 of the way down that wall.
And then there is the woman who's one of the silent, the silent Americans. But Lisa, one of the things we haven't talked about, and we'll never, this would go on for a while, is Philip's enormous interest in movies, constant subject of conversation, and that he often said, he came out of a summer, and we had lunch at the old Union Oyster House in Boston, and it was filled with shoppers, and he began telling me about the lake paintings, about his disbelief at them, and he began I had not seen any of them, and he began sketching them with those beautiful long fingers of his in the air, and we started to talk loud.
He said
I
technical
started
what
to
he said
talk
on the
loud.
last panel.
And,
It's impossible.
and he said at that point, and many others, that he felt like a movie director.
When he took
The
a break,
scenes were coming into his mind,
He did
and
name a
simply
few.
realizing.
when he took
Well, the
a,
famous to Fellini. Yeah.
when he took a break from painting, he generally went to a movie.
Yeah, but
And it actually played with bit roles in 2 movies. at
yeah,
time.
okay, but that's a very good point. Okay, why did he think himself as a movie director and love film? I think this comes back to again the court idea where everybody is in the same proscenium, and also it seemed to back out for the idea of still life, Lisa.
I know.
Which
you want me to talk about still life?
yeah, because Morandi seemed to be such a big influence on
Well,
him.
the thing that when I brought up Morandi in relationship to Gustin, it just, when I looked at both of these artists, with the, having known nothing about them as a young artist, they looked very similar to me, and I was trying to figure out what it was. And also, there were 2 artists that I was a student at Tyler School of Art. I studied with Stephen Green, and he was, a wonderful. He himself was a student of Gustin's, and then I think I studied with him 2 years before he retired. I was told by everyone he was never going to remember. He didn't like female students, and he wasn't going to know my name. So I walked up to him, I said, "I'm Lisa Yuskavage," and then he said, "Okay," and he walked away. And I said, "What's my name?" And we became really good friends. I just bullied him. I bullied him. We became really good friends, and we talked a lot about Gustin and his memories of being a student of Gustin's, and when I brought this up to him, and I was like, I just said, like, look at these 2, like, what I see is the horizon line of a landscape as a table's edge being imagined. It's a table's edge as a landscape horizon line, and then the objects, in both cases, feel to be these. He's conflating two different forms, the landscape and you know, it kind of keeps going back and forth. And then Gustin takes it so much further by then conflating the portrait and using human body parts and heads and scale in that. But that line that is at a third of the page, that traditional horizon line, that both of them sort of come back to often, and the quality of the touch. I almost could see in Gustin that he'd been looking very much at the touch of Morandi, which is such an extraordinary touch.
Yeah.
Especially his landscape paintings. Morandi's late, like those landscape paintings that are almost falling apart, the looseness of it. Is this something that you knew that he was in love with?
The Roma paintings.
Yeah.
Yes, he loved Morandi.
Yeah. And the fact that, Morandi, did they ever meet him?
Morandi died relatively late, but
Yeah.
I think he wanted to reach out once,
I'm
but he
not
never
sure.
managed to do it.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I read somewhere he didn't manage to do it.
Who did he meet when he was in Rome? I'd be curious, like, when he was in Rome, was Chirico still alive? Did he meet him?
I think he met him at a
Did
party.
he like his, well, he was obviously admired his
I
work.
love to cure.
Yeah, I mean, Chirico.
From the beginning,
Yeah.
from the age of 16, when he went to the Ehrenberg collection
That's
in
right.
Los Angeles.
Yeah.
That was his first exposure to the Chirico. And if you look at the painting that he made subsequent to that, which we still have at 17, it's sort of de Chirico and Picasso, early Picasso,
Yes,
in
absolutely.
one.
Yeah, and I'm curious to also ask, in regard to abstract expressionists, because I remember distinctly in that show 1988 at MoMA, because I looked pretty carefully about, like, at least 4 drawings from the early 30s, and then went back when he went to Rome in 48. And it's so interesting, the shift, particularly in the late 40s, while he was in Italy, he made a group drawing of the town, it's called Forio, in the Isca Island, where the crowded buildings seem to lend themselves to the formation of vertical and horizontal. And then, immediately in the 50s, you know that he began to extend the attraction to the plus and minus Mondrian. But unlike Mondrian, who extend the rectilinear relationship of horizontal and vertical line that reach beyond the canvas, it broke the frame, so to speak. I mean, you can immediately could argue that Mondrian had a significant influence on abstract expressionism, particularly someone like Franz Clive, Katy, Harry called him a melted Mondrian. I thought it was very perceptive. But also the idea of Pollock or overpainting, another furthering disruption of the easel of the frame of the painting. Whereas Gustin, immediately, as soon as that he came to Italy, as you say, admiring Morandi, it's really contained. This is where the still life motif became a perpetual condition of how he composed form. And Morandi, unlike other still life painters, who normally would set up the table below eye level, Morandi actually set up the table right on his eye level. Therefore, the bottle appeared incredibly monumental. And this is so interesting because he did talk about Piero, particularly flagellation. That painting, he must have gone through it and seen it, that remarkable painting at the Galleria Nazionale delle Marche in Urbino, remember? Also loaded with content.
Piero was basic to him, and he gave me a copy, as he gave Clark Coolidge a copy of the Roberto Longhi book.
Right.
In Italy, if you look at you can read the late work backwards and see the horse's ass. In a couple of pictures, comes directly out of Caravaggio. Some of those body parts come out of Luca Signorelli, who he was passionate about. Montagna, I remember him saying, the great thing about those pictures is he doesn't care if a whole army of people goes off the cliff. That's how powerful that picture is, how determined it is to be. We went together, one of the few times I saw him in the city, to a show of late De Chirico. It's the one where De Chirico is on a prancing horse, wearing a king's outfit. I mean, I thought Philip was going to have a heart attack with laughter.
Well,
it was as if this guy could do anything.
I've been doing a lot of research on Picabia because I'm doing a panel. I'm not a Picabia expert, so I've been studying like a little schoolgirl, trying to come up with something. And I think I found a few things, but mostly what really jumped out at me in looking at Picabia in the show, I kept thinking, and I was going through the wonderful catalog that Moma did for the show, I kept thinking De Chirico. And then, of course, I was thinking about how crazy it is, how often these great artists have been censored at the end of their lives when they're really truly free.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, obviously, you know, Gustin suffered needlessly because he was making probably the greatest art that I think was made at, you know, just about any time in history. And, you know, I mean, too bad he wasn't able to hear that from people.
Oh,
he heard it from some people, but not enough people. You know, it wasn't, you know.
Philip needed his enemies too, just as Nixon did.
But what I was going to say is that De Chirico is still censored, and we still have not seen a total show.
No, that's true. I don't know if that's censorship, but we have a total show.
It has been because with Picabia, when he had the show at the Guggenheim, they left out those late so-called porn pictures because they were just like, you know, he didn't know what he's doing. He went off the cliff.
No, it's impossible not to go through the Picabia show without thinking of Gustin.
Yes, and I think that these artists, they all sort of are very resonant of each other, and especially because towards the end they really heated up and disturbed people quite a bit, and I think it's made some of the most interesting work, and it's still hard. I mean, it's like hard for people to look at the late De Chirico.
I want to go back to Piero because we spent the night, Lucy and I, with Gustin in Woodstock. And he took out his books on Piero and spent literally from about 9 to 3 in the morning going through every one of these. He could tell you exactly what Piero painted on any day.
Yeah.
He had studied those works so closely.
And a copy of The Flagellation was on the wall next to Durer's Melancholia and to the Sphinx. These were foundational works for him, absolutely.
In fact, the image of the man about to whip or flagellate Christ on the far left, Lisa, actually had the same gesture of those whipping Klansmen in the late 60s, which is so interesting. But that tied back to his ability to reconnect early on 30s.
And he'd actually painted those whips in the
right. The conspirator that painted. My point is, I think even the repertoire of the images have significant symbolic freedom, so to speak. It go back to the beginning, and then it take to the present of it, and somewhere in between that it need to appear or reappear. It will. For instance, if you take the rope I mentioned, which is part of the flagellated Christ or the Klansman, but it also evoke the symbol of the very rope that he found his father who took his life with. And I think that's so interesting. The same thing with the shoes. We talk about the clumsy, big shoes. We talk about the significance of the soul that appear in his late works. Somewhere, some time ago, someone wrote about how he saw the shoe, not just a child seeing the father big shoe, but also the shoe of the Jews who were asked to take off the shoe before being shot.
Phong, when we all live a little bit longer
Right.
with these images that Philip has given us, we'll know more about what they were to him.
Right.
I've been living with these paintings now only for, say, 40 years. He lived with some of those images, obviously, his entire life. I don't want to leave without mentioning one thing, though, something that it's off the wall. This is not followed other places. That Norman Rockwell's portrait of Nixon is surfacing. It is the most un-Nixon image you could imagine, and will show you that these are much closer in spirit to who the man actually was. Nixon's got his arm stretched out like this, and his hand holding his chin. It's just pure fakery, and it's pure connivance. It's pure Rockwell, of course, and pure Nixon, but it is not real in the way that these are
and what
absolutely
did you
real.
say about that, Bob? I mean, illustration.
Sorry,
comic. No, that's what he's implying.
I got an alarm to wake me up again. Look, actually, I gave a talk at the Rockwell Museum, and it's true. I always found Rockwell is very interesting because he worked completely from photographs and transformed them. And there's a wonderful book of those photographs and how he transformed them. And I went to the High School of Music and Art. And I was sort of marinated in art, and even though I was a bourgeois kid from Queens, and I never quite bought it, I still haven't bought it. But and yet I always wondered, because when I went there, and you had to pass an exam to get in, you had to be able to draw. Okay, actually, I had to be able to draw. And I was always astounded at people who could draw as well as Rockwell. And when you go to the museum and you look at this stuff, there is something stunning actually about it. And at the same time, I always wondered in my own experience, why do I find it cloying? In other words, why do I not actually like it? So I do think there is something here that doesn't capture. To say it captures something real about Nixon is a delusion. It's a delusion in that we don't know anything really about Nixon. We know about our reactions to Nixon. And what it captures truly is, for a bunch of people, their reactions to Nixon. They're almost libidinal reactions to him. So when it captures that type of truth, it captures, it captures something. My view on everything is one of extreme skepticism. My own opinions are everybody else's. That's the nature of being really, a cartoonist. What I'm most fascinated about here is just this wonderful survey of art that I forgot to pay attention to at the High School of Music and Art when I was in school, and just how passionate the discussion is about these various things that, to the outside, from the point of view of the cartoonist, everything is to be made fun of. Certainly, in other words, the whole history of art, you can look at in the New Yorker magazine, and how it looked at abstract expressionism from the very beginning is, what were the two things that Pollock did? It was the splatter, and what else? It was
The drip.
Yeah. So there's a great Peter Arno cartoon where the guy is standing up in front of the simulation of it. Says, "I admire his drip, but not his splatter."
The notion of he's getting at something that's real in Nixon is a delusion. I can see its appeal, but I can't entirely go along with it. And just as I would argue that, or propose, that when Joyce said in Riso Veritas, he saw the truth in humor. I said something real, and I'm not trying to fudge about that. I'm saying that what I see in these pictures is absolutely something that reminds me powerfully of who this man was over a period of time. Is that his ultimate, deepest reality? I'm not going to say. I'm not even going to go there. But it's as far as I can go, and that's really.
Look, these come down to questions of empiricism.
I don't want to do that. No,
You know,
you're right.
You know,
Absolutely.
all of
And
these,
you
the rabbit
trumped me,
hole, I don't
and
think
you
we
trumped
wanna
me
go down.
1,000 times.
It's Nixon's version of himself. It's not Gustin thinking he has the truth of Nixon. I think exactly because like all the pictures of him at Duke in law school, and he did all this sort of whining about how he was from a poor family and he went to school in a clapboard shack, and so there are all these pictures of him in front of a wood stove, in law school. So it's a little bit, it's Nixon's self-mythologization. So it really is. Nixon is so much about self-image and so open about his pathos and his self-pity that I think that's what we have here is Nixon's vision of himself more than some objective truth.
No one without self-pity could write a book titled My Six Crises.
And I think that's what Roth picks up on with his book. And he says, later, doesn't this guy believe in anything? Because one minute he's with McCarthy and it's a red scare and anti-China, anti-Russia. The next minute he's talking about the People's Republic of China and making a trip there. And I think like Trump and like Ronald Reagan, that was a leitmotif for both Roth and Gustin, that there was no real Nixon in some way because he would just change his politics. For civil rights, anti-Semitic, with whatever worked. So,
And is there a real Hillary? I mean, we're all here on the same side, so it's obvious to people. But remember how much vitriol was put at Hillary, how much people hate her. So I think one of the things you pointed out to me is that maybe he really didn't hate. I don't hate Nixon. I mean, Nixon is a tragic, pathetic figure, an interesting figure, a fascinating figure in American history, and to see him really in his humanity, I think partly that, when you look at these pictures naively, as frankly, to some extent, I do, because I'm naive, and then being really informed by this discussion is interesting. You actually, you see a pathos. If you just look at this, you see vilification if you know nothing about it, right? It seems to be a guy completely vilifying in a sexual, essentially almost pornographic way, a figure. Certainly if someone was Nixon's friend who looked at this and didn't know anything, they'd say, that's horrible. But what I think was interesting to me is that you inform even the connections that you find between the two, and I guess that's what makes it art.
Well, sure. We have, but you're right. There's a long view that we have, and those younger. One of my first responses to Trump was that I'm 74 and I may not live long enough to take that view. And you who are younger will take that view, and he'll be another man, maybe more of who he is now, but he will certainly be somebody else in the future.
Why don't we?
Our first orange president.
Yeah. I think Lisa, I think it's a good time to extend some of the audience question. Please, we can have a microphone going around.
There's two things. One is, I'm not sure if I can understand that you could look at Nixon with what might be a level head now, but I think during the time that he was alive and president of the United States, a lot of people felt about him the same way. At least those people who were of the liberal, left, whatever, looked at him pretty much the same way as that same group looks at Trump. So what interests me in that sense is, maybe I could touch on it, so also with Gustin, because according to the text on the wall, he went through a similar thing as Nixon, where, that's what the wall text asserts anyways, where in 1970 at the Marlborough Gallery, people didn't like what he did, so essentially he fled the country to Rome. So what I'm saying is basically that there's a context here. Who are those critics collectors, patrons who were anti-Gustin, who supported him. Who were they specifically, you know, because critics are kind of important, you know, we have like Hilton Kramer started his whole thing that he's right in step with, you know, he ended the NEA grants for critics and under Reagan and such. And so, like, where is the critical response to both Gustin around this time period? You know, who's supporting this work? Who's not supporting this work?
So that's your question.
That's
okay.
one question. And the other point I just thought about, and I'm not sure what his name is, but when you spoke about the Orgy pictures, I think around that time was when a lot of people first became aware of the Bohemian Grove, and there were a lot of rumors and such going around about Nixon and Kissinger and that whole gang participating in orgies and such at the Bohemian Grove and out there.
That's two questions you're asking. Okay, let's deal with the first one first, and then we'll do the second. You want to take the
I was
first
going
one?
to say, it's a great question,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting problem, but maybe not for some, you know, because it's like in our history question, who was on whose side, and I would just recommend that Deborah Bricker-Balkin has written really well, you know, and about this issue, and you can always, if you're really interested in all the details, because she goes through every critic, Greenberg, so Greenberg is the main person who's formalist and saying you have to be abstract, and then who are the people who are supporting Gustin. She goes through all Greenberg, Rosenberg, Thomas Hess, all of those people. So her name is Deborah Bricker-Balkin, and she's written quite a bit on Gustin, and you could go into delve into that, because there aren't a lot of supporters right away, but she pulls that all apart.
Rosenberg was the critic for the New Yorker. Hauser.
Yes, he wrote some for the New Yorker, so none of them really, nobody really liked it, but Hilton Kramer was someone that especially disturbed Gustin, his rejection, because he had the New York Times platform, but John Russell wrote a nasty thing, and so, but it's mostly negative.
She's just finished a book on Rosenberg.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
That'll cover
She's
much
very
of this
good.
material.
Yeah. Would you support it, Irving?
I'm sorry?
Would you support it as a critic, what Gustin was doing in the 80s?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Totally.
Okay,
But
so
it
you
took
have one.
time.
Maybe.
You can't imagine the shock of walking into that show of the figures
Right.
in 1970, and Philip coming over and saying, "What do you think?" And I didn't have the foggiest notion of what I thought.
Right.
It was at that point that all of his abstract expressionist colleagues call him into question and turn against him.
The one thing you might look at is that Robert Hughes, who Marlborough opened the warehouse, and Philip met Hughes at the warehouse. Hughes was the critic at the time, and Hughes, groovy, that moment, came down on his motorcycle, black leather jacket. They had a great time. They went out for about 3 or 4 hours, and Philip was amazed when the review was not as positive as he thought it would be. Much later, in The Triumph of the New, when he, and in his television show, he said, "I got it wrong. I did not, it was wrong." I'd also point out that Hilton Kramer did Philip such a great favor by coming down so hard on that, not then, but over time. Absolutely. And Philip returned to it again and again as a sore that he could only scratch finally in his work. This is not so easy as us and them. There seems to be much more to it. But it's always interesting, as Katy said, to find out what was actually said and who said it.
Yeah, I mean,
And what the reception.
I think I would say that it's the opposite what Kramer, title of his review was. So instead of the Mandarin who pretend to be a stumblebum, it should be, I think, called stumblebum who would relieve not to be a Mandarin. I think that he really.
I think it should be
What do you think?
the original title and then you say that like there's something wrong with that. You know, like, what's wrong with being a Mandarin pretending to be a stumble bum? What's wrong with that?
Right.
Everybody's like, oh my God, that's such a horrible thing to say. But I think it's actually kind of,
It's a great title.
it's a great,
Yeah,
no, but I
well,
think it's
it was
also
never-
not, I also think it's not a bad thing. It's like most of the time when I hear criticism, whether it's about myself or someone else, and actually if I believe that the person's work is actually good, I always think, well, you're right, and that there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually, you're getting it, but your spin is wrong. You're saying it's wrong. It's actually kind of great.
I have heard that Kramer never actually took credit for that headline,
Right.
which might not be surprising because often headlines appear on articles in any newspaper written by someone other than the writer. About your question about the Bohemian Grove, if Philip knew anything about it, it never came up in our conversations.
There was a book, I think it came out 4 or 5 years ago. It's called The Dark Secrets of Richard Nixon. And there were substantial evidence about his gay love affair with the owner of the Key Biscayne Bank. Guy's name is Bebe Redazzo.
Bibi Rebozo. Bibi Rebozo.
All right, I was in Vietnam. I didn't know that.
Vietnam! You're going to see the Vietnam card?
You heard it here first.
I wonder what Gustin would have done with that.
That whole Hillary pedophilia thing.
Well, stop ordering pizza.
Okay, why don't we take one more and then just add this week. Oh, here. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I kind of wanted to get back to a question that you posed, Katie, earlier, and mentioned wanting to maybe get back to it, which is about who might be working in an analogous way now, or who might be capable, or, you phrase it much better. But I also wanted to mention, along with that, that I was listening to the same radio program this morning, and what struck me as well was one of the speakers mentioned that art right now, this was just her opinion obviously, but unless it was Art speaking, then it was his opinion, that art right now it's astonishing that it has gotten to the point where it is precisely not political. That, so this was, I don't know if you remember that comment.
Yeah, Art Spiegelman decided to bash the successful artists. He basically was like bashing Jeff Koons or something. It was like, that was where I was like, yeah, whatever.
Was that Art Spiegelman or something?
Yes, and I thought, I was kind of like, it was too, like, blah, blah, we've heard that before. Everybody knows it's good to bash those guys, It's like, if I hear that one more time, it's like, it's a cliche.
Right, so it
They
kind
were
of
saying something
that's-
interesting up to that point.
I mean, I think the subtlety is art that's going to be made now that is kind of it's not going to look like this. It's going to look like its own thing.
What's your question, though?
Well, my question was to bring back your question.
Yeah.
So I guess I was,
All right.
and I was curious.
Go in another direction, and away. If we have to talk about painters and drawers, I'm sure she had somebody in mind, but I would mention Samantha Bee. I would mention all of the television people. I would mention where comedy's going. I would mention where Saturday Night Live goes, which did not exist during Nixon and did not exist during Kennedy at all. And I point out that we now have this. I kept this October 31st, 2006 New Yorker, which has Hillary Trump being sworn in by Putin. They were playing his husband with John Roberts. So the New Yorker does some things, but they do them as one shots, and they do some others. But there seems to me to be a groundswell of stuff happening in music and there's Meryl Streep the other night. That's not chopped liver.
Well, but these works were done, as you pointed out, in relative secret and privacy.
Right.
And maybe there's a lot of people going to be doing work in secret and privacy, and not necessarily, we won't know about it until later.
Could I make just one point about satire? And I just want to quote Peter Cook, who was a comedian with Dudley Moore. He said, satire is very powerful. Just remember what all those clever cabarets in Berlin did to stop the rise of Hitler. Okay, it has very little effect.
But I think it's an
That's all. I'm telling you, it preaches to the converted. Essentially, if you just want to look at it empirically, what is the effect of satire? Yes, absolutely. It makes you feel good. We did 50, 100 cartoons about Trump. Trump is sitting in the White House.
Yeah.
Okay, so all the stuff is, I mean, this is what I do. I think it might have a slow, acrid drip that changes people's minds a little bit, but it might not. John Oliver on Trump was amazing. These were some of the most fantastic, comic, intellectual, informative riffs ever done. Didn't have much of an effect.
I don't think that, I mean, I think this is, and I was having this discussion partly over email over the last night with Mark Bradford, because I'm working with him on a project, and you know, he's moved from working under Obama to working under Trump on the American Pavilion for Venice next year. And people are sending around, oh, you know, Cindy Sherman and Richard Serra say art strike and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you know. So the question is, you know, what does art do? But I don't think Philip Guston thought he was going to stop Richard Nixon. But I think he understood something about Richard Nixon. And I think he also said, these are the things that have driven me crazy since the time I was a teenager. From the Scottsboro Boys to the Klan to the Holocaust, and he said the Holocausts of our time, plural, to Chile, to Indochina, all of these things were the things that he cared about. So it's not some misguided idea of his own importance or his own social, some misunderstanding of his own social power, but I think it's something profound that adds a dimension beyond a comedy routine or whatever about the way the world works. And I guess I hope there is someone else working away in their studio who's going to show me something similar that I don't understand yet about what's going on.
I want to share, Jack.
I don't have a question, I do have a statement.
Yes.
Irving is probably the only person in here, you remember Reuben Kadish?
Reuben Kadish.
You remember? It was Reuben who first introduced me to Gustin. The year would have to be, I was a student at Cooper Union, it would have to be about 63, 64. And Reuben says to me, and 2 or 3 other students, you should meet this man. What did I learn from that experience of meeting Gustin at that time? The man was all passion. But that's what I got from him. It was all passion. And I knew that something was being transferred, or just that slight meeting. Over the years, I met him more than once.
Yeah.
Going back to what Aaron said about walking into that first show with the figurative painting, my feeling was the same as yours. I didn't know what the fuck to think. I mean, I was like, I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
But years later, we happened to run into him. And again, a group of us later confirmed, David McKee was telling me the same story one time. Someone asked, well, why did you stop doing those abstract paintings? You know what the man said? He said, I got bored.
Thank you for the story. I think that okay, I will share with you this. I will share with you this, and I will share with you a wonderful book that I read in college that made me cry. A book was written by Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and who was a neurologist and a psychiatrist who invented logotherapy. And the book chronicling his own experience. And what is so remarkable, without going into great detail, he seemed to offer that there are only 2 kinds of men in this world: the decent ones and indecent ones. The decent man, indecent man. And this, as much as there were very decent as Nazi guards, the SS, as it was some of the so-called capo. You remember that term, K-A-P-O? Capo, who was asked by the Nazi to oversee the labor for their own prisoner, who essentially torture their own for personal gain. And I would end this, if you can spare it, with a few beautiful lines. One of his favorite poets, Rilke. It's called The Man Watch It, but it's the tail end of it. When we win it with small things, what extraordinary and the internal does not want to be bent by us, like the angel who appeared to the wrestler of the Old Testament. When the wrestler's sinews grows long like metal strings, he felt them under his fingers like chords of deep music. Whoever was beaten by this angel, who often simply declined the fight, went away proud, strengthened, and strong by that harsh hand, as if to change shape. This is how he constantly, forget the line.
Looking at me, you forgot.
This is how.
Forget a lie.
Yeah, this is how he deal with constantly by defeated, constantly overcome with greater being. I just read this morning, hello, in the toilet. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you. And thank you, Kate.